In 2021, he made history by becoming the first DA mayor in KwaZulu-Natal. And in next year's elections, he's also attempting to make history by becoming the first DA premier in KZN. Joining me today is the DA KwaZulu-Natal premier candidate, Christopher Pappas. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember this, but the first time we met was in 2019. I was still an intern reporter at the Daily News, and you were still Ward 31 councillor in eThekwini. And we had met for a protest, this flat, Suringa Avenue. So these ladies or these residents were being evicted from this flat. They'd resisted apartheid forced removals, and now there's these private landlords that wanted to evict them, to turn that flat into a student accommodation. And you were there standing in solidarity with the residents.
It was in Glenwood, yeah, I remember.
Yes.
We were there that day with a petition.
Yes,
and
yes.
To plan a march that was taking place, I think it was 2 days later.
Yes, yes. What do you remember about about Christopher Pappas during that time?
I think I'm very much the same person. Obviously with a little bit more experience and a little bit less hair. But I cut my teeth in the ground. I mean, I started working in eThekwini in Manzamdot and Umlazi and Chatsworth. And the people I worked for then were very much hands-on people. Don't complain about the refuse not being collected if you've never got on the truck and experienced what the truck driver and the workers experience. Go and experience that. Never try and represent people if you've never actually been to see what the conditions that they're living in or what they're experiencing. So I think I'm the same person, just with a little bit more experience and maybe a different appreciation for what power can do for changing lives and changing the future.
And at that time, obviously, you were a very ward councillor, which in itself is a very hands-on job. What drove your politics, and is that still what drives you now, obviously, as you search for a higher office?
Yeah, I think very much so. So when I was ward councillor, as you said, I was very, very hands-on, and being a ward councillor is about, the grass and the potholes and the blocked drains and people's individual problems. And I think I've tried to internalize that as I've grown. So as mayor, I also try to focus on those issues, the daily issues that affect people's lives. Because I think we can get bogged down in the big conversations without actually focusing on the real issues that are affecting people's lives. So while there's important conversations happening at a big level, a lot of the time those things are not having realistic impacts on the daily struggle of each individual to put bread on the table or keep the business open, whatever it might be. And I think that's what I want to keep doing. I want to humanize what government is supposed to mean to people.
And you've had a very obviously busy 4 years, as you said, ward councillor, you went to the KZN legislature, you became DA Umngeni Mayor, and now you're obviously running as the candidate for the DA, premiership in KZN. Do you not think that maybe it's a bit too early for you?
No, I don't think so. I think that in the 2 years that we've been in government in Umngeni, we've done. I mean, there's still a lot to do. There's still a lot wrong, but we've managed to show that you can fix things and you can do things differently. I think that this is the perfect opportunity. People are hungry for different type of leadership. They're hungry for younger people to take opportunities within leadership roles, and people who maybe do things a little bit differently politically. The establishment within KZN politically is the same political establishment that's been there for a very long time, that does things the same way, that says things the same way, and I'm coming with something different. So I think it's a perfect opportunity to engage in politics, and specifically at a provincial level.
And, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Umngeni has an annual budget. It's just under 600 million, right? And obviously, as you said, you've only been there for 2 years. And now you want to move, obviously, you want to become the premier of KZN, which is about, you're going from 600 million to about 600 billion, give or take. That shift from the, is there a mindset shift? As I said, I think it might sound a bit similar to my previous question. How do you handle that shift? Do you not think that, maybe you move from Umngeni, you go into eThekwini, or you go on from Msunduzi to eThekwini, and then you make the shift from to the legislature? So, how do you analyze that?
So I think my personal belief is that local government is a lot harder than provincial government. you don't phone your MEC, you don't phone your Premier, you deal with your ward councillor and your mayor, the person who you know, they're in your community, the issues are theirs as well. They live your experience. Whereas ministers and premiers and MECs, they don't have that same responsibility. And in doing so, I think that there's a greater responsibility at local government level that then can lead into provincial. The principles are the same. The principles of getting the books right are the same. Doesn't matter whether you're in a trillion rand company or a 50 million rand company. The principles are still the same. Cater deployment, all of these things. But the other thing is this, is that the provincial government should be focusing on long-term strategic interventions. We should be supporting local government to achieve those daily interventions, those daily deliveries or deliverables. But we should be looking at how do we look long term? How do we build for the future? And those things that's about strategy. It's about stakeholder engagement. It's about balancing resources. It's not about fixing the pothole every single day. That's the local government's responsibility. And I think having worked in a big metro as a ward councillor, having served in the legislature, having been a mayor, so in government, I've been in opposition and in government, I can bring that together to say, how do you bring all these different levels of government together and try and achieve some sort of long-term strategy and long-term interventions for KZN?
And before we talk about KZN, obviously a lot of issues in KZN, we're both from the same province. I want to speak about, obviously, that the fact that you are the DA KZN Premier candidate. And obviously, as you said, there is a need for young people to actually occupy these positions. However, the DA has obviously overlooked the DA KZN chairperson, Francois Rogers, and obviously overlooked a lot of people much more experienced than you. And I have a theory that obviously that next year's elections are a very seminal moment. We've seen the polling that the DA has obviously been releasing a lot of statements that for the first time ever since 1994, the ANC might go beyond 50% nationally and also in KZN. So the DA actually putting you up there is sort of a Hail Mary. They hoping that they're going to sort of benefit from your likeness, from your recent popularity. I don't know. It's my theory. I don't know. Am I wrong in that, a lot of much more experienced people have been overlooked because obviously this is a very important elections and this is the DA throwing a Hail Mary?
So I think the word overlooked is incorrect because we have an application process where people who want to stand for the position apply, we wrote exams and interviews and all sorts of crazy things that we do. And Francois, because that's who you mentioned, there's others as well, there's Dean, there's corporate leaders across they didn't apply. They endorsed my candidacy to say that we believe you're the best person for the job. So that's the first point, just to correct that it wasn't a overlooking. It was a conscious decision by other leaders to say that we believe that you should go forward. And they could have contested, but they didn't. The second thing is to say, I am the only leader in the DA in KZN who has experience in government. And when you're sitting at such a crucial election, when you're coming into a mess, it's important to have someone represent you as someone who's been in government. So Francois, for example, comes with incredible institutional knowledge of the legislature and how that works. But at the same time, I come with a different experience, and that's how do you turn around a government. So that's the second thing. The third thing is then sort of about my popularity, if you want to call it that. An election is a popularity contest. To say whose ideas, whose track record, whose ability to deliver is better out of all the other political parties. So if I am a mayor that people who see is doing something good, or at least making a difference, and the organization and myself believe that I can do the same difference or same good at a different level, then yes, it does serve as an advantage to the DA, to the people of KZN, to say, here's someone who's doing something at a local level, he can also do something at a provincial level. Do you believe in him? So, we mustn't shy away from that. You don't go into election to say, I want to be the, disliked. It's those three sort of answers to your question. But yeah, there's no deliberate sidelining of anyone. We all work very well together. In fact, it's actually to our advantage at the moment to have more than one leader on the ground driving different things. Franson's doing an incredible job within the organization to say, how do I mobilize the members internally towards this election campaign, whereas mine's more outward focused to say, how do I show that the DA can be in government and mobilize people to join the DA. So it's actually working really well.
You don't have any fears that Francois Rogers might do what Boniso Duma is doing to Nomusa Dube?
No, not at all. Because I mean, we first of all we believe in separation of party and state, and they don't. There it's the same thing. And then also we do it in the Western Cape. You have a leader of government and you have the leader of the party, and that it works well there. My job is to deliver on the party mandate, whereas Francois is to run the organisation from a political perspective. And if you're true to your policies and if you're true to your manifesto, then it becomes very easy as a leader to differentiate those two, because you're implementing policy and manifesto as opposed to individual agendas within government.
KwaZulu-Natal is a very, very complex province. You obviously want to become the leader of it. What do you think has gone wrong? Where do you identify the fault lines, and how do you think you can fix them?
So there's a lot wrong. Everyone lives sort of our daily lives. We know what it is, but I think there's a couple of fundamentals that we need to change if we're going to fix or we're going to rescue what the mechanism of delivery is from government. So the first is cadre deployment. Our government is full of people who are unable to deliver, firstly, who have no interest in serving the public and would rather serve a party political interest. It is full of people who are either unskilled or unqualified because of an affiliation, and it is just too big. So cadre deployment has really, and it's one of the biggest challenges that we faced in Umngeni, is to try and create the mechanism of delivery. So you can have great policies, you can have great plans, and the mechanism is the government officials. So that's a big problem. We have an incapable state within KZN. That's the first one. The second thing is priorities and how we spend the money of government. So we know that there's fiscal constraints and all of these things, but government is not poor. Government is not bankrupt. When you spend the money incorrectly, you start to then skew what you're trying to achieve. So an example is an Imbizo costs anything from 1.3 to 2.5 million rand, depending on how many people you're busing in and what you're feeding and all of these sorts of things. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of pipes to be placing in rural areas with water. That's a lot of houses to be built. That's a lot of ambulances that you could fix to be able to solve the problems. But we use them, when I say we, politicians in our province use them as mechanisms to try and garner political favour. So budget priorities are incredibly important to be able to shift away from non-impactful to things that actually have real tangible impacts on people's lives. So those are just two issues.
You mentioned unskilled people, and I think I remember when you started off as the DA mayor in Umngeni, as the mayor of Umngeni, you had some sort of skills audit, qualifications audits, where you asked for everyone to actually resubmit their skills, and there was a lot of resistance to that when you did it in Umngeni. Now, you imagine when you obviously have to do it in a province like KZN, and it goes to the question where obviously this is, I don't need to tell you about political violence in KZN. This is a province that has been plagued by political violence, and usually some of it stems from people wanting to keep their jobs or their patronage within government. Do you have that appetite to deal with that political violence in KZN and all the dangers that comes with having a very high office in KZN?
We have to. We have to. You can't let the fear be the thing that drives you away from trying to solve the problems. So whether you have an appetite or whether you like it or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that someone needs to solve it at some time, whether it is the DA or another political party or from within the ANC, but someone needs to do it. So we can't let the fear drive us away. And tough decisions need to be made. That's what leadership is about, and that's what change is about. If we talk about progress, people don't vote for progress at this particular point in time. We want change. If things were going right, we could be voting for progress, but we're not. We're voting for change, and that change is going to be difficult. So, am I up for it? Yes. Is it going to be difficult? Of course. Should we shy away from it? Absolutely not. If not now, then when?
You're concerned though about your safety.
I would be stupid if I wouldn't be. I mean, I live in a province where political killings have increased over the years and government has done nothing about it. The Premier doesn't even show up to meetings that political parties have, those inter-political party forums. They don't show up to these things, where there's very few convictions. And we have the Morane Commission, which is basically just gathering dust on the shelf. So I'd be silly if I wasn't scared or fearful of my own safety. But again, if not now, when? And if not me, who? And the same can be said for many brave politicians and civil society people who stand up and take a stand.
So, a number of things have obviously happened since you announced that you're the DA, KZN Premier candidates. How has it been? How has it been? Has it been everything you expected, or has it been a bit much more than you anticipated?
I think both. I think the thing that I've sort of been surprised at the most is how easy it is to abuse information, or use or misuse information. And it's in a digital era, it is really a threat to democracy, and also a risk to democracy. So you obviously your profile increases, and there's different conversations that you have. It's no longer just about fixing pipes and things in your local municipality. You have much bigger, broader discussions around politics and things like that, which is fine. That's what happens. But the use and misuse of communication technology, social media, it is something that takes getting used to, because you're playing in a different space where people are entitled to their opinion, but those opinions are not always informed, and sometimes they are malicious, and that takes getting used to. I think for anyone, whether you're in politics or in media, you cover a story, and because someone doesn't like the way you covered it, you're corrupt and useless and whatever. So that's probably the biggest shock, if you want to call it that.
I think obviously one of this, there was an incident with JP Prinsloo. I think that's probably what you referring to when you talk about malicious.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, I think there's others as well, but I think it's also just the way in which people differ in putting their opinions across. So you can be looking at a broken bridge, and you're saying there was R1 million spent on this bridge. Where's it gone? And the reaction that you get, the way that people react, it's so divisive and so impersonal. As if there's no human beings on the other side of these devices that we use and things like that. But yeah, also that incident where you spend so much time and energy defending something that when you ask for the evidence of the allegations against you, no one knows where the source of the allegations is, nor can they provide you with any evidence of that wrongdoing. So you can say anything on social media, and as a politician, you have to then respond and be held accountable, which is fine. I mean, we must. We must be held accountable. But there's an element of fairness as well to say, well, you can say anything you want, and I must respond, but you don't have to have a burden of proof as well to say that actually this is what I'm saying.
We spoke about the ANC. Obviously, the ANC has been losing the votes with every election since 1994. They've just been on a downward spiral, even though they still remain the biggest party in South Africa. But also the DA, when you look at the DA in terms of the last two elections, we've also been losing votes. How do you analyze the health of the organization, the health of the DA?
So I do think when was the last national government election? It's 2019. I think in 2019, yes, we did go backwards, but then we've stabilized since then. This is evident through by-elections, and in the 2021 result as well, we stabilized there. I think we went through a period of as an organization to say, okay, well, we've gone from a 1.3% party, and now we're sitting at 20%. What does the next step in our evolution as an organization look like? Because we have the broadest spectrum of voters. We have the most diverse range of voters in terms of religion, rural, urban, racial, age groups. So what does the next step in the political party's evolution look like? And I think we went through a wobbly space in trying to define what that means. But I think we've largely recovered from that. I think there was internal, when I say internal, administrative lack of guidance and stability, to a point where you didn't know what the message was. You didn't know who you were talking to. You didn't know what you were saying. And, in one community you'd say one thing and then contradict it in another community just for the sake of winning votes, which is not right. You should stay true to your principles and what you actually believe in. And I think we've come a long way since 2019. And like I said, there's different results and polling that shows different things, which is exciting. I've never been more sort of sure of what the DA stands for and what our message is. And I've been through a number of elections with the organisation, and I think many members feel like that as well, and many activists and many members of the public representatives of the organisation. So I think we've settled on that. We've said, we want to be the centre of South African rational politics. We're not competing for EFF voters. We're not competing for extreme left or right voters. In this election, maybe in 3 or 4 elections' time, and that's okay. But what we want to be is know who we stand for, know what we stand for, and be able to speak to those people clearly. And the majority of South Africans, or a good portion of the South Africans, 35% of South Africans, are rational-minded, centrist people who want the same thing, who largely believe in the same values and principles, and we can argue about, the odd difference, but I think that's who we're speaking to. And it's interesting to see the evolution of the organisation.
Right. And I think you just described the DA as a centrist party. I think, political analysts, and I think there is a perception that the DA is right-leaning, right? And I think one of those is obviously the DA has seemingly taken a stance with regards to farm murders. And I want to ask you that when you look at farm murders, do you think they divorced from the daily violence that South Africans all across the country suffer from? There's about 27,000 people that were killed in a year period, right?
Sounds like a war.
Right. So do you think that farm murders is a separate entity that should be taken separate from the daily violence that every South African goes through?
I mean, violence is violence, and people who die, because of crime, die. And that's not good. We must fight that. I think the nature of farmers, when you talk about farmers, we're talking about people living in rural areas. Because it's cross. The violence that people go through, and sort of the brutality of it is different to a normal housebreaking. When I say normal, it shouldn't be normal. A housebreaking that happens in a suburb. The isolatedness of the people living in rural areas is also not the same, because people can't shout for their neighbor or get help quickly. So there is an element that is different. I think when you add then the political context of the type of rhetoric that we hear in the media, not the media, but politicians, and the sort of there's no other group of people. Rural people are victimized because of their isolatedness. So yes, I do think that we must treat them differently, like we must treat gangs differently. It's a specialized type of activity. It's not a house robbery. It's organized crime. And so I think that's the difference, the brutality of it. So, someone breaks into your house in suburban Sandton, you're not likely going to be tied up, beaten, have hot water poured on you and the like. And that's usually what you find. I know that's the extreme case. And also, you're probably going to have a reaction very much quicker in suburban Sandton than you are in rural, wherever you are in South Africa. But I think you're not asking the question that you want to ask. Because the idea of farm murders suggests that it's white people.
Yeah,
and farming is. But you must ask the question. Let's get to ask the question.
And no, I do get that, and I think because obviously I was leading up to it about especially the right leaning, and organizations like obviously AfriForum have pushed a certain narrative, right, where that they feel that through these farm murders, white people are being persecuted in the country. Obviously, we do know that farm murders, they do also include people that work in the farms who are not necessarily always white. And obviously, I do want to get your thoughts on that. Do you feel there's some sort of persecution on white people?
No, I don't think on white people, no. I think that generally you find that most of your farmers are white, and therefore the proportion of white farmers being attacked would be white. But that doesn't mean that the crime is only against white people. I used to be the spokesperson for agriculture in the province for the DA, and there were more incidents against rural and I'm sorry, small-scale black farmers in rural areas that went unreported than there were against white farmers. So the problem is there. It exists across the racial divide. AfriForum has obviously got a membership group, and they're an advocacy for a certain group, so I can't speak for them, and they must do the work that they do. But from the DA's perspective, where we intervene, we say, well, all people living in rural areas, particularly rurals, and that's why we have, the Rural Safety Plan. It's not the Farmers Safety Plan, it's the Rural Safety Plan, because we recognize that. To get to the point of sort of right-leaning versus left-leaning, we are a centrist organization, and that center spreads left and right. not extreme and not extreme. Your centre has views on either side. So on one side, we are an organisation that provides the best social services to people living under our governments, and that might be seen as a leftist view, just that sort of direction. On the other side, we're saying that we're being abused. Citizens are being abused in terms of taxes, and they're being overtaxed and underserviced, and that's a very right-leaning view. But we occupy the centre, and the centre does have those two views. I mean, myself, I'm a social democrat. That doesn't mean that I don't believe in the DA and that I must leave the DA and start another party. It means that my voice must find expression within that centrist discussion so that we have the best centre viewpoint.
The DA in KZN has is in a coalition or some deal with the IFP. You remember that Mbuyiseni Ndlozi spoke in Mangosuthu Buthelez's funeral about that the EFF will make history with the IFP in KZN, and as obviously the EFF has obviously been quoting the IFP. Any concerns about that?
No, not really. The the EFF changes its mind and its views on different political things and coalitions, like the weather changes over summer and winter. So I'm not worried about that. You remember they used to hate Jacob Zuma, and then Jacob Zuma was their best friend, and then they were for the Springboks, and then they were against the Springboks. So they go where the wind goes. So no, I'm not worried. I think our relationship with the IFP is not just words. It's something that we're doing in practice. The EFF knows that it's got no chance in KZN to occupy any space other than with either the ANC and IFP, and they've tried with the ANC and it's falling apart, and we know the issues there. So the only other option is the IFP if they have any real opportunity of getting into government. But it's not working at a local level, so it won't work at a provincial level. But so to get to my point is that what we are trying to do with the IFP is to actually have a relationship built on experience. To say, we're not always going to get it right and we're not always going to agree in local government. That's fine. We're two independent organizations. But when those issues do happen, when an IFP government is not delivering, or if there's a case of corruption or whatever it might be, how then do we as a partner in government deal with that, as opposed to just shouting past each other like we see all the time? How do we make sure that we are independent organizations but that we can work towards a common objective?
I can imagine that probably an issue you probably that might be a bit thorny between the DA and the IFP is the Inyama Trust Board. Inyama Trust Board, obviously millions of hectares of land. It owes billions to eThekwini. I don't know if it does owe any money to Umngeni. I don't know it owes to Msunduzi. And the DA in eThekwini, where I used to work, has obviously wanted to go after Inyama Trust Board. And that has always been a division within the DA and the IFP. How do you solve an issue like Inyama Trust Board?
So I think both the DA and the IFP have opposed land expropriation without compensation at a national level for similar reasons, and one of those is also relates to Ingonyama, so actual property rights. And the issue around property rights in KZN is at the moment PTOs, permission to occupies, that's what people used to get, are invalid. So our debate or our fight is to ensure that people who are living on Ingonyama Trust land have some sort of right to that land beyond just this is a cultural inheritance. What that looks like, that needs to find expression in the Ingonyama Trust Act. Interestingly, I must be 2 or 3 months ago now, I sat down with Isilo Samabandla, the king, and he wants Ingonyama Trust to look and feel different as well. He wants the land to be used differently as well, to be more productive, to give back. To a point where he said that the Ingonyama Trust Board itself has been useless over the years. And I think they've changed it now. So he's got a new board in there. So that's a big statement coming from the king to say, well, what's been happening in the past hasn't been working. I want to do something differently, especially around resources. Land is a resource itself. So I don't think we're too far off with the IFP. The fact that Ingonyama Trust Board has not kept control over leases and those sorts of things, that's what's led to debt in municipalities and all of that. So that needs to be balanced out. Give you an example in my municipality. There's 4 or 5 registered leases with Ingonyama Trust Board. those have never been communicated to the deeds office, which then could not find expression in terms of us charging rates. Now, when you go and speak with the board, they say those people should be paying you. It's not us that should be paying you. The lease is with them. That lease means they should be paying you, and these are businesses, garages, and things like that. So I think it's more of how do we take a piece of legislation that was almost cobbled together at the last minute, and that's the Act, modernize it, take into the consideration the views of the royal household, who also wants to see something different, and then ensure that the provisions in the Constitution around property rights are also protected.
But obviously, we're talking about billions, right? So maybe not in your municipality, but when you look at it in KZN, we're talking about billions that Inyama Trust owes to different municipalities. And I don't think it's always the same situation where it is the people living on those or occupying those land that are not paying rates. Sometimes there are businesses who do pay into Ngonyama, and then Ngonyama doesn't pay into the municipality. You become mayor, you become KZN premier tomorrow. Do you go after Inyama Trust for those unpaid rates and unpaid taxes and unpaid municipal bills?
I think where there are cases, we have to. I mean, where you've got a mining company who's not paying their taxes for some reason, then I mean, that's only fair. But where you've got a largely rural, poorer community and the the rates invoices against Ingonyama Trust, who are you taxing? Because the same argument can be made in a township area. It's just that there's thousands of individual property owners instead of one. The people on the land or the people in that area are still themselves, they cannot pay. But I think you can't treat it as one. If there's a mining company who's not paying, they must pay. If there are registered leases for businesses who are not paying, they must pay. But you can't treat the whole land as one thing. You can't treat Ingonyama Trust land as if there's one activity happening on it. There are commercial farmers who have got agreements, and game farms who have got agreements. Why then is it fair for my game farm, who's not on Ngonyama Trust land, to pay and someone else's? But I think the real question, I think the sort of the separation has been where there are commercial activities happening for profit, and people are using that as an excuse to not pay. We must tackle those issues. But where you have impoverished communities or rural communities or those who have inherited their land over time and are not using it beyond just living there, then that we must see that differently. I mean, we're not America where we just have blanket property taxes. We have cultural elements that we need to take into consideration.
And just my last point on this issue, and I think what I'm trying to get at is with your coalition with the IFP and with Ingonyama Trust Board, owing a lot of money to government, would you be able, do you have the guts or, I mean, the appetite to actually go after Ingonyama Trust Board and say, hey guys, you owe us a lot of money, you need to start paying up?
Of course, we have to. It affects our municipalities as much as it affects IFP-run municipalities. But again, you're not tackling ugogo hlalekhaya. Like that's not your aim. Your aim is to say, okay, well, how do we ensure that ugogo is never going to lose her house in a way that doesn't also compromise the custodianship of the royal household of the land? Because that's what it is, essentially. Right? Ngonyama Trust is not separate from the royal household. It is the custodian of the land on behalf of the king. But at the same time, so while you're protecting ugogo, how do you ensure that Nongoma municipality run by the IFP, where there's a mine that doesn't pay, receives the income that it needs from that mine to be able to run the services to provide for ugogo? So again, it's not as nuanced as saying Ingonyama Trust Board owes government. Ingonyama Trust Board is an entity on behalf of the king. The king is the custodian of the land of the people. The people are made up of businesses, they're made up of households, they're made up of different things. So yeah, I know I'm not answering your question directly, but it's very hard to treat each parcel of land, each landowner, each activity as the same. But yes, we have to have the guts to be able to, and we will have the guts to be able to tackle the issue of Ingonyama Trust land, not to take it away from Isilo, but to be able to utilize the land for the benefit of everyone who's on it. And I know that's the direction that the king is also moving into.
Graham Macintosh, I'm not sure if you do know the name, former DAMP, a long-time member. He resigned from the party early this year, and he released a statement which was quite homophobic. And this is what he said, in his statement. Chris Pappas never misses an opportunity to mention his own sexuality and thus promotes the homosexual agenda of a tiny militant activist lobby within the estimated 3% of registered voters who may be homosexual. he obviously quit the party, and I do have to mention that Dean McPherson was quoted in this article that I'm reading from as condemning these comments from Graham Macintosh. When you read that, I don't know, how did it make you feel when you read that?
Uh, I mean, obviously, it hurts when people say things like that, especially when you don't know where they're coming from. Sort of what's driven them. I do know Graham. Graham is a very elderly gentleman, retired and lives by himself in a home, and has jumped from very many political parties over the years, and is entitled to his opinion. My job is to protect his right to have that opinion,
Mm.
um, but also protect those minorities that he is attacking in that opinion. Do I throw my sexuality out there? No, I don't. I've never campaigned on my sexuality. Is it part of who I am? Yes, it is. Like my age and my background and my education, all of those sorts of things. Um, I don't. I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm not going to divorce myself from it. Um, and he's entitled to his opinion. The fact that it made a newspaper was interesting because you sort of ask who is he?
Mm.
Who is. But again, I think it's just the fact that when a lot of people link things to my name, they get some traction and his opinion gets out there. But yeah, people are entitled to their opinion. I respect that. Mine is to also fight for those who he's speaking ill against, I guess, if you want to put that.
And just lastly on Macintosh, and I think maybe you understand why I'm bringing him up again. He mentioned something about that he'd struggle to actually present you to black voters within KZN, present you, meaning as a homosexual man, to black voters. Now, obviously, that is a bit condescending to the black electorates, and it is obviously not true because obviously you won in Umngeni in a predominantly black city. But what I do want to ask is that, have you ever felt that your sexuality has ever been a factor? How do you think that the electorate, whether black or white in KZN, has actually, welcomed or sort of welcomed you or interacted with your sexuality?
No, I don't think so. It's not something that I campaign on. It's part of who I am. I don't go out there and say vote for me. I'm a white guy. Vote for me. I have blonde hair. Vote for me. Whatever. These are things that I was born with, and that's who I am. Um, how people consider them, that's up to them, up to each individual. But I think the reality is in KZN is that there are so many differences between people, whether it is religious, whether they're intricate cultural issues, whether it's sexuality issues, that KZN is a lot more tolerant of individual difference because we understand that about people. That you look what happens at home or work or what happens in your family, it's yours. Um, and that's not to be ashamed of who you are, and that's not to keep it a secret. But there's that tolerance that's been built up in KZN of these sorts of things, and it's not exactly taboo within Zulu culture either.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think what Graham has always tried to do is he's tried to portray himself as a white person who's extra ingrained in KZN. He'll come to DA rallies and shout Zulu slogans, and that's fine. That's how he grew up, and that's his way of showing that he is part of the new South Africa and whatever. So I think his views are misaligned with the reality on the ground. And as you say, I think it is condescending to the black electorate to be an elderly white gentleman who is homophobic or perhaps has his own secrets that he's hiding and then portray that as other people's views.
Did you feel protected by the DA? And I'm asking this because, I mean, Helen Ziller, your federal council chairperson, always on about pronouns, that, pronouns are wokus pocus, and she does have a very sort of antagonizing based on her tweets, I've never seen it personally, but just based on her tweets, there is a bit of an antagonizing, personality towards people in the LGBTQI. Now, obviously, I'm from KZN, and I know obviously it's you, Sakile, Martin Mayor, who are obviously openly homosexual. do you feel that within the DA that you are protected, or you are able to actually live as you are, but also be able to participate as a politician?
Absolutely. More so than anywhere else. Uh, I've been part of discussions with other organizations where LGBT type issues are spoken about, whether it's social or economic or just general human rights based issues, and I feel at home. I think Helen's point of view is not about whether you can or cannot be or should not be, or whether you're welcome or not. I think hers are about over political correctness, to a point where we cannot have conversations that move us forward because we're scared of talking about things that are difficult. Um, so I think that's her point. So I've never felt excluded. I've always felt defended. I've always felt like I've got a home. In fact, sometimes we've got structures within the organization for different sorts of voices, so that we're not left behind, if you want to put it like that. And I feel that those are well represented. So yeah, no, never felt excluded. And in terms of defence, yeah, Dean came out strongly. The provincial chairperson came out strongly against this particular incident. Not even to my asking. It was just something that I was going to like, someone's done an op-ed again or made a comment or whatever it might be.
And you were just speaking about that sometimes we try to focus on issues that don't necessarily have any impacts on the ground. And I remember you once did a Q&A on Twitter, and there was one of the answers that you gave that actually brought a lot of social media outrage, where you said you think that racism might be a distraction to the bigger issues that people are facing in South Africa. So I just want to, what did you actually mean by that? Because obviously Twitter is obviously very limited by the number of characters. So I just, maybe if you can just clarify, what did you actually mean by that?
So I never said that racism is a distraction. I said that race is a distraction.
Race, yes.
Racism is incredibly important. Racism is something that we have to tackle every single day. Racism is something that's entrenched in our society that we have to fight against. What I said is that race becomes a distraction to the broader issues in society. And that's not to say that race is not important in the conversations that we have. But sometimes we lose track of trying to solve the issues by stopping there. So we'll be talking about fixing the economy and we stop on race. And we don't move beyond that discussion to say, okay, well, we understand it's important, but what is the solution? How do we factor that in? So it was never about race or race. It was never about racism. Racism is bad. And we have a problem in South Africa where we have incidents of racism. In fact, it was with, I think it even might have been, it was with another journalist, where he asked me for a comment on something. I know there was a strike or something like that, and he said to comment, the ANC has said that you're a racist white boy, and that's why you don't want people to do something. You're disconnecting electricity or something like that. And I said, okay, well, how do you want me to respond? You've known me for 15 years. Am I the racist white boy? He says, I'm so tired of the racist narrative when we talk about important issues. Because racism is such an important issue and it gets watered down by constantly putting it into a context that it doesn't exist. It's the same as homophobia. Or whatever it might be, gender-based violence and those sorts of things. It's become, everyone just uses it, and it loses its importance in society. So to answer your question, racism is bad, and that's not what I said. I said race is a distraction to the bigger issues in life, bigger issues in South Africa. We get bogged down there and we forget. And can I use an example?
Yeah, sure.
So if you take an elderly black lady in a rural area and ask her to draw a list of 10 things that are important to her and her future, and you do the same for a wealthy white lady in Umngeni, and you compare those lists, they'll be very similar, and the top of those lists won't be race-based issues. It might be racism, but it won't be race-based issues. It'll be employment, the future of my children, healthcare, am I going to eat tomorrow, etc., etc. You'll find those issues. And that's what I mean, that we in our conversations jump race to the top and we forget about all the other issues. Ingrained in those other issues is the issue of race, but it is not the primary mechanism that we should view our conversations.
I think there could be an argument that South Africa is obviously a country that comes from race-based subjugation, race-based oppression. And obviously, when you do obviously look at it, whatever, whether it's jobs, the economy, it is obviously the inequality is from a race-based point of view. How do you solve an issue which was obviously in large parts brought about by race-based oppression without race-based policy?
So I think the first point, the departing point from that is to say that we have to recognize that we can't divorce the fact that we have a past that exactly as you described, there was race-based policies. But those race-based policies led to the inequalities and the structural issues that we have today. So to solve those, to put a different race-based policy is not going to solve those. It doesn't solve the underlying issue. The underlying issue is the lack of access to opportunities or the equality of opportunity. So you can create BEE, which says that your company or your business must get preferential treatment based on the color of your skin. How has that helped black people? It hasn't. Because the same people, by virtue of the color of their skin, keep getting contracts. So Ramaphosa, as an example, just because he's a black man, will keep getting contracts. He doesn't need empowerment. Who needs empowerment is the small business who's just starting up, who has just managed to save enough money to buy his first TLB, and that's the business that needs empowering. But he is also black, right? But he doesn't get assisted because he's not within networks and the system that we've created based on a race-based policy, which is BEE. Our alternative to that is to say that we need a needs-based policy, and automatically will address the majority of the need in the country, because the majority of the poor in the country and the majority of the excluded are black. You mustn't hide that. That's not something that you can cover up. We must acknowledge that and accept it. But within the 95, let's just say 95% of black people who are unemployed, just for argument's sake, you have a Ramaphosa and a Gwede Mantashe and a Patrice Motsepe who don't need any more empowerment. So exclude them. But we can't exclude them because our policies only look at race. So the DA is saying let's look at need. Because in that way, you address the issue, and the need is the majority of people who are poor or black, and you address that need. But you also then don't exclude that Indian family who also needs assistance, and that colored family who also needs assistance, and that white family also needs assistance. So race is crude, whereas need you can measure. I can measure your household income. I can measure your level of education. I can measure all of those sorts of things. Whereas race is crude. It just says, by virtue of the fact that I'm looking at you now and you have a different color skin, therefore it means that you need empowerment. And I think that's wrong. And that's what we're fighting against. We're saying, let's look at need and help the real people who need help.
Which obviously are majority black.
Which are majority black, yeah. So, and then you can get into like really interesting conversations around, okay, so what does empowerment mean? So if you've got an inequality of education, for example, the current government believes that 30% is a great pass mark, and you're going to get 30% at a rural school with no toilets, no whiteboards, no anything, and you're going to succeed in life. Majority of those kids are black, right? So our current government believes that's okay. What we're saying is, how do you translate the need to intervene into the real deliverables of change? Education, healthcare. If you've got an uneducated, if you've got a sick, if you've got a community that doesn't have transport, how do we intervene there to create equality of opportunity? So the young black child in rural Ntuba has the same opportunities as a child who goes to school in Glenwood and Durban. And then you start to intervene in terms of opportunity to say, you're going to have the best school in Ntuba. The only reason why you're going to fail is not because you're black or not because you are rural. It's because you decide to go home and sit on your hands and not take advantage of it. And then it becomes about the individual, and you don't start to classify people all as the same.
I think my last question is, so what happens? What's the next step for you? If you do happen to lose, I do wish you all the best. But I just want to know that if you do happen to lose, do you go back to your job as the DA Mayor of Umngeni, or do you now go on for a position in the legislature? What's your next step?
And we're not going to lose, so that's it's an irrelevant question. No, I'm kidding. No, so I still remain the mayor of Umngeni. And win or lose, I'm still the mayor. I have to then decide to step down as mayor and allow my deputy to take my position. I think there's three scenarios. The first scenario is we stay in opposition at a provincial level. In that case, I'll remain as mayor. The second is that we go into a coalition where the DA is the majority party. Then I become premier, most likely. And the third is we go into a coalition, into government where we're not the majority party. In other words, we occupy positions of chairpersons and MECs and those sorts of things, and those are negotiated at a later stage. So those are the three scenarios.
In the third scenario, where do you go?
So the third scenario was if we a minority in a coalition government. Well, it depends. So there are important positions around COCTA, which is corporate governance and traditional affairs, finance. There's important roles to play as MECs, but then again, the DA might decide that we don't want any MECs. We'd rather have the speaker and chairpersons of the committees to be able to hold the IFP to account. So it depends on what the outcome of the election is. But what we are aiming to do is make sure that we get the most number of votes, so that we are the majority in a coalition. In that case, then you can come and visit me as the premier.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.